he has or had been with the FBI about 25 years. Is that right?
Well, now you're testing my knowledge a little bit.
Okay. He was a powerful guy. Is that correct?
I'm sorry?
He was a powerful guy. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know that I would use that description.
Okay. He had no power?
I think every law enforcement agent in the FBI with the responsibilities they're entrusted with has significant power.
Okay. Did he work on the President Trump Russian collusion investigation?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. Not that I'm aware of, but I can't say that with certainty.
Did he or does he work on the FBI investigation of Mr. Hunter Biden?
So the investigation that you're referring to, and I have to be a little bit careful because we're talking about an ongoing investigation, is being run out of our Baltimore field office, working with the Delaware U.S. Attorney, who's a holdover from the prior administration.
So I'm confused, Chris, with your answer. Did he work or does he work on the Hunter Biden investigation?
As I said, the Hunter Biden investigation is being run out of the Baltimore field office.
Isn't it true that in September of 2020, Special Agent Thibault went on social media and liked a Washington Post article entitled, quote, "William Barr has gone rogue"?
I have seen descriptions to that effect. I have to be a little bit careful about how far we can go in this conversation because of specific ongoing personnel matters.
Isn't it true that also in September of 2020, Special Agent Thibault went on social media and posted a Washington Post article entitled, quote, "Why the Michael Flynn case still matters"?
A similar answer to the one I gave before.
Isn't it true that in November of 2020, Special Agent Thibault, Assistant Special Agent in charge of the D.C. office, who allegedly worked on the Trump-Russia collusion investigation and the Hunter Biden investigation, retweeted a Lincoln Project tweet that said, quote, "Donald Trump is a psychologically broken, embittered, and deeply unhappy man"?
Again, I've seen descriptions of posts, and I'm really trying to be very careful not to get in the way of any ongoing personnel matters.
Isn't it also true that in January of 2001, in response to Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville's election to the United States Senate from Alabama, of course, Special Agent Thibault went on social media and posted, quote, "Thank God for Mississippi, the state motto of Alabama"?
Can't sit here and quote chapter and verse on an individual's social media posts.
Isn't it also true that in June of 2020, Special Agent in charge Thibault, a 25-year veteran of the agency, tweeted to Congresswoman Liz Cheney, quote, "Your dad was a disgrace"?
Again, I've seen descriptions to that effect, but I'm going to have to be very careful not to interfere with any kind of ongoing person.
And last month, didn't Agent Tebow go on media and tweet, quote, "Can we give Kentucky to the Russian Federation?"
Again, same answer that I've given before.
All right. Isn't it true that Mr. Tebow, Agent Tebow, excuse me, and FBI Supervisory Intelligence Analyst Brian Otan covered up derogatory information about Mr. Hunter Biden while working for the FBI?
Well, again, I want to be very careful not to interfere with ongoing personnel matters. I should say that when I read the letter that describes the kinds of things that you're talking about, I found it deeply troubling. And
It is trouble.
And it is totally.
And it's not about their political beliefs.
Right.
It's not about their political beliefs. It's about that this is a senior employee at the FBI with years of experience going on social media and tweeting this kind of stuff.
So I have, since I started in.
Which gives the people the impression that there is bias, whether there is or there isn't.
I feel very strongly, and I have communicated consistently since I started as director, that our folks need to make sure that they're not just doing the right thing, that they're doing it in the right way, and that they avoid even the appearance of bias or lack of objectivity. And in fact, one of the things I did, which to my knowledge had never been done before at the FBI, was in 2018, I pulled together and I started at the top, which in my experience, and somebody in law enforcement, it never works that way. I started at the top and I brought the 250 or so very top people in the FBI from one corner of the globe to the other for a full day stand.
Share with you that the challenge of migration that we are experiencing at our southern border is not exclusive to the United States. It is something that is gripping the entire hemisphere.
But my job is to worry about the United States.
As is mine. As is mine.
And here's my question. Let me try to rephrase it. And I really do wish, I understand the position you're in, but you really should try to do a better job of answering the questions. Under the Biden administration, we have the most encounters. We have had the most encounters with people attempting to come into our country illegally in the history of ever. Under the Biden administration, we have had the most people entering our country illegally in the history of ever. Under the Biden administration, we have had the most gotaways at our southern border in the history of ever. Under the Biden administration, we have had the most number of people entering our country under a claim of asylum, having that claim turned down and still not being deported in the history of ever. And under the Biden administration, we've had the most fentanyl coming into our country in the history of ever. How can you possibly say the southern border is secure?
Do you know
I understand your answer that you're trying, but I'm not asking about your efforts. I'm asking about the results.
Well, let's talk about the results then, Senator. Do you know that last year we expelled and removed approximately 1.4 million people from the southern border? I believe that's the most ever. Do you realize that we are focused on enforcing our laws to achieve the security of the southern border?
I know you're focused, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Secretary, but you're not succeeding.
Senator,
and when you come testify to us, you talk about how you're trying really hard. And I don't have any way to disprove that. I accept that statement in good faith. But the numbers belie that.
If I can, Senator, let me give you an example of a solution that we have delivered that for some reason is being contested. Because it's caused the 95.
I gave you 30 seconds, okay?
It's caused the 95.
Don't filibuster me.
It's
You've
caused.
been doing that all day. I'm just trying to ask
I'm just
you
trying to
questions.
communicate. It has led to approximately 95% drop in the number of encounters in between the ports of entry at our southern border of Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans.
Mr. Secretary,
on January 5th.
Mr.
And why would that
Secretary.
be opposed when it is delivering precisely the result that you seek?
Did you just parachute in from another planet, Mr. Secretary? Because you're the only person in the Milky Way who believes that we're not having massive illegal immigration into America.
Senator, you're putting words into my mouth.
No, sir,
There is-
I'm
there is-
accurately describing the
There is
situation.
no question. There is no question that we have a very serious challenge at our southern border.
Okay,
It
let
is
me-
a
let me-
challenge.
Well,
that is
we can agree on that. Let me ask you another question. Why don't you just declare a new policy that other than children, if you present at the southern border, you claim refugee status, you claim political asylum, and you haven't claimed refugee status and political asylum at the first safe country, then you can't come in.
Senator, so first of all, when one presents at the border, it's an asylum claim, not
But
a
why
refugee.
don't you do that? Why don't
Not
you
a
just
refugee claim.
unilaterally declare that a safe third country policy? It would work. You can't come into America. If you're coming from Venezuela and you come through Mexico, if you didn't claim asylum in Mexico, you can't come here. You have to leave. Why don't you just do that?
Well, Senator, let me give you an example with respect to Mexico. A safe third country agreement, let's hypothetically
you
assume.
don't have to have an agreement with Mexico.
Yes, you do.
No, you don't.
I believe you do,
No,
Senator.
you don't.
I'll have
Other
to-
countries don't do it. Just adopt a policy that says, except for children, because you don't want to send children back by themselves. Just adopt a new policy that if you didn't seek asylum in the first safe third country, you can't come in, period.
Senator, are you aware of the notice of proposed rulemaking that we issued, the comment period of which closed yesterday?
You've had 2 years to adopt a policy like I just described. Why haven't you done it?
So, Senator, what we have done is
But why haven't you done that?
we have surged enforcement resources. We have
Why haven't
developed.
you just adopted? Please, if you would, Mr. Secretary, answer my question.
It is my understanding.
Why haven't you adopted unilaterally a safe third country policy? That would stop, except for children, all the folks from the Northern Triangle countries, all the folks from Venezuela, all the folks from Cuba, all the folks from the Middle East from coming into our country. Why haven't you done that?
Senator, it's my understanding that those are two things. It is my understanding that those agreements do require.
You don't have to have an agreement with anybody. It can be a policy established by the Department of Homeland Security.
Senator, I'd have to review the.
You
legal-
haven't reviewed that? You haven't considered that possibility?
Let me finish, if I may.
Sure.
I would have to review the legal underpinnings of your
Well, you
assertion.
better get reviewing.
And I also
You ought to
do
get
not-
reviewing. This is the first time that's occurred to you.
I also do not think that that is sound policy.
You don't
to
think
shut-
this is the first time that's occurred to you?
I also do not think that that is sound policy, that we should shut down our entire asylum system.
I didn't say shut down the entire asylum system. I said safe third country. All you have to do, Mr. Secretary, if you're really serious, and it's beginning, frankly, to appear that you're not, is adopt a policy that says we're not seeking anyone's agreement. We don't have to. If you're coming from another country and you come through, let's say, Mexico, and you say you're seeking asylum, and he said, that's not a bailout because money's not being provided by the American people. It's being provided by all the other banks in America. Well, Mr. President, as you know as well as I do, there is no money ferry. There isn't anything free. Anything free, somebody had to work for it. by taking the hit, all the banks in America now I'm referring to, banks are taxpayers, that's point one. Point two, but those banks, all the banks in America that are going to have to pay for the president's bailout, they're just going to pass on those costs, including but not limited to their depositors. And last time I checked, most depositors in banks in America were taxpayers as well. The second reason President Biden's bailout is a bailout, and this is in the fine print, but he has set up I think it's a $25 billion fund that other banks that are in trouble can borrow from. And this fund, he says, does not come from the American people. It came from the banks. Once again, the costs of it will be passed on by the banks to the depositors, to the taxpayers. But this $25 billion fund that banks that are in trouble can borrow from is set up as follows. The banks can borrow money as they need it, and as collateral, they put up their securities. So the president says that's a safe bet. Except when you read the fine print, you find out that the securities that the banks put up as collateral to borrow money from the American people are not what's called mark-to-market. They aren't, the securities are not put up at their real value. They're put up at the value for what at the time they were purchased. So if you bought a security that was, let's say, to make it simple, $20, and it's owned by a bank, and it's now worth $5, you give that $5 to the $25 billion fund, but it's really, and you get credit for $10, but it's really worth only $5. I mean, it's a bailout. And I'm not going to bubble wrap it, and I don't think we ought to try to bubble wrap it to the American people. Now, let me say a word about Silicon Valley Bank. All the bank failures were an abomination, but I think Silicon Valley Bank is symptomatic of the problem among all three. SVB, as we call it, Silicon Valley Bank. First of all, Silicon Valley Bank was not broke. It was not an insolvency problem. It wasn't insolvent. Silicon Valley Bank had a liquidity problem. I mean, here's what happened. Silicon Valley Bank took in a whole bunch of deposits on which they were paying an interest rate. And then Silicon Valley Bank took that money and went out and bought a bunch of securities, paying a higher interest rate than Silicon Valley Bank was paying the depositors. You say, that's pretty smart. There's just one problem. The securities that Silicon Valley Bank bought were very sensitive to interest rates. And as interest rates went up, and they have, the value of those securities went down if Silicon Valley Bank had to sell them. And sure enough, Silicon Valley Bank got itself in the position of having to sell them because a lot of its depositors got scared about the bank's position and other reasons and said, we want our money back. And Silicon Valley Bank didn't have the money because it had to go sell these securities at a loss. And that put it at risk. And that's why it had a liquidity problem that could have been fixed. It wasn't broke. President Biden's bailout could have been easily avoided if we had done, let me put that another way, if three things had happened. Not all three, but any one of the three things I'm about to explain. Let me say that again. President Biden's bailout could have been avoided if one or more of three things had happened. Number one, if the management of Silicon Valley Bank had known the difference between a banking textbook and an LL Bean catalog, Silicon Valley Bank would have never bought securities that are so sensitive to interest rate without hedging that risk. And it's a very easy thing to do. Honestly, it's banking 101. If you buy securities to back your deposits that are very sensitive to interest rates, there are other securities you can buy to hedge that risk so you don't take the risk. I'm appalled. The bankers at Silicon Valley Bank didn't do it. I mean, it was bone deep, down to the marrow, stupid. Number two, okay, Silicon Valley Bank management did it. It was like a rock, only dumber, but they did it. The regulators didn't catch it. There's been a lot of talk about Silicon Valley Bank wasn't being regulated because of a bill passed back in 2018 or 2019. That's not true. Silicon Valley Bank was heavily regulated. It had to file regular reports with the federal banking regulators.